Where are you up to now with Molly?
I think she would accept that we're friends. We're friends, but the rest is all history. So it's an amicable relationship. If I arrive at the airport, she'll come pick me up. If I stay out with them, she usually goes away for the day or whatever, and I spend that time with the children.
And your relationship with Anne Louise and James?
Well, Anne Louise is very close. You know, father-daughter, first daughter, and very close. As I am actually, I think, with all my girls, but I've got 4 of them. With James, very remote, very remote. I don't have any communication with James at all. He took a route that he preferred, and therefore he hasn't called me for some considerable time, and I have trouble contacting him.
Well, this must be the source of considerable pain for you, actually.
Yeah, it has been, that's for sure. And when you've got 2 handicapped children, they're pretty bright. Timmy got a medal over there in Perth for being a model citizen. He worked for 15 years collecting shopping trolleys at the shopping centre. But he was so good at his job and knew everybody, they used to transfer him around from shopping centre to shopping centre, so he knows all the shopping centres in Perth. The one guy had the contract for several shopping centres. So Tim was his first port of call if there was a problem. If somebody hadn't turned up for work, or if he was short of numbers there, Tim would go. And in the end, all the ladies there, because he used to take the trolley when they went to their cars, he'd go and meet them at the car, help them unload their goodies in the back of the car, and then take the trolley back for them, all that sort of thing. So they nominated him to be the Citizen of the Year. And he had a presentation, the local member gave him a medal, and the local mayor or councillor, wherever he was, and he got a bit of a write-up in the paper. So he was a determined worker. Even now, to this day, his whole day is taken up looking for a job, and he's had a very difficult time the last few years getting a job, getting a permanent job. Whereas Johnny's quite happy to help his mother at home and do all the more domestic chores. But Anne Louise is married, 3 children, and gorgeous children.
Good mother?
Oh, very good. Well, extreme. Better edit that bit out too. She's extreme. Health-wise, she's extreme. Yeah, she's a good mother. Devoted to the children.
You proud of it?
Very. She's the brains in the family. She's got the brains I never got. She did science first at the University of Western Australia, and then went over to England for a holiday and worked with a lawyer in London there as a armour, if you like, and help around the house with his children. She came back and she said, had no idea what she should do, and I said, go to Bond University and do law. Well, she'd be the only person you've ever heard of that did a law degree with first-class honours in 23 months. Less than 2 years, she graduated first-class honours and was chosen valedictorian for the year and to do the address at the awards presentation. And to her credit, I've always had a liking for Alan Bond and a respect for Alan Bond for what he did for us. And she rang me and said, what am I going to say? What will I say to these people? You know, you're going to have 1,000 people in this auditorium and I want to make it interesting. I said, ring Alan Bond and ask him why he set up that university, the first and only private university in Australia. What motivated him to do that? So she rang Alan, had a chat with him, and then when she made the speech at the thing, she mentioned that she'd spoken to Alan and his motivation for setting up the university, which has been, as you probably know, an outstanding success at university. Anyway, not satisfied with having a law degree and working for Macquarie Bank for a few months, nearly a year I think at Macquarie Bank, well, she did 2 years in Singapore with a English law firm in Singapore, then came back to Australia and joined the Macquarie Bank in Sydney. And then wanted to get married, so she met Albie, married, and in the process, I'm working at Macquarie Bank, decided what she really wanted to do was not law, but medicine. So she enrolled in medical school and started studying medicine in Sydney, missing all her friends in Perth, so she withdrew from that and started medicine with the University of Western Australia, the Catholic University there, I forget what they call it now. Anyway, she enrolled there. Into the second year, she met Albie, got married, and started having children straight away. So she never finished a degree in medicine. Well, the biggest thing about the boys were Tim and John. And John is more severely handicapped than Timothy. But it's amazing what they know. Their memories are fantastic. If you ask him what he had for breakfast in 1986, when he was holidaying in Colindale, he'd be able to tell you. If there's a new car that came out, or a new model of the car, and I said, that's an Austin Healey, he'll say, no, that's not. That's the, he will know the details of that vehicle. His memory for things is incredible. People. He would have met somebody when we first came to live in Australia, and he came to stay with us periodically. He'd meet, say, the grader driver. He'll remember his name, where he lived. Amazing. And Tim's the same. You ask Tim the Caterpillar, the horsepower of a Caterpillar D9, he'll tell you the brake horsepower as well as the horsepower. He'll tell you whatever detail you want to know about that machine, he'll know. Olivia, of the four of them, Olivia and Laura were equestrians, so they did a lot of riding. I bought ponies for them all, and we went off to a gymkhana once, and I put each one on their respective horses, and Nina got on her horse and immediately bucked her off, and her words when she hit the ground was, "I am never getting on another fucking horse in my life," and never did. But back to Olivia. Olivia was, in her last 2 years at school, she was determined there were greater priorities in life than being schooled or education. She had some interesting little quirks. We used to have a big thing called a rhinoceros beetle in Papua New Guinea. It's a very large black beetle, about that big, and it hisses wildly all the time. Well, her idea of fun would be to catch one of those and put it in their mother's bed, because when they're covered in the sheets, they're very quiet, and when you lift up the sheets to get in the bed, they start whistling. Anyway, then she went off to Europe and worked for some years here with the Suncorp Bank, and then went off to Europe and met her partner John, and came back to Australia pregnant and had 3 children, but decided all her life she really wanted to graduate from dissecting insects into forensic science. So she enlisted at Bond University in forensic science, and graduated with honours from Bond University in forensic science. At the same time, she had 2 children. So she had 1, had 2 more children, and reared those 3 children. At the same time, she was studying forensic science at Bond. So it took its toll on everybody. You know, everybody had to bend a bit, but she got it, and got it with honours. So
Okay.
we're very proud of that. Very proud of that achievement.
Nina?
Now Nina, apart from her experience riding horses, just going back to the incident with the pony, earlier we'd taken over this place at Kingsthorpe, an old Gowrie homestead, and the fellow who had occupied it previously had a lot of polo ponies. And you know, a polo pony is designed that when the tap of the heels, and it takes from 0 to 100 in seconds. Anyway, Nina's sitting on this horse, Olivia's sitting on one, Nina on the other one, and Nina taps the horse with her heels, and it went from 0 to 100, and Nina came off it. That was her first experience at equestrian, and then the second one was when she got onto Bendigo, and Bendigo dumped her unceremoniously. But Nina's the academic in the family, and she did very well at school. She was having trouble at the school here in Toowoomba, and then we moved her to the Southport School, St Hilda's. And there she really blossomed. She was very good at art and very arty, and did extremely well, but she took a leave from, she went into university in Brisbane then and studied art, and then took 1 semester out and went to the United States. And the normal practice was, I think, you're only allowed 1 semester, but she appealed and got 2. So she spent a bit of time in university outside New York at a place called Patterson, and did very well there.
Now, tell me about her as a person.
Nina and I have had our clashes over the time. She tends towards the left, And so we've had those sort of clashes. She's very defensive as her mother, so if I enter into a battle with Anne, then reinforcements emerge very quickly on the other side. As a person, she's got an outstanding personality. Just getting back to her, to what she did after she graduated from college, came back from the States after her university and did extremely well there, and then she went working overseas. She worked 1 year in Port Moresby in the arts, the Moresby Arts Centre. Then she went off to Cambodia and learnt Khmer language and worked for AusAid in Cambodia, and then for another private company that did distribution, helping the less privileged. Then he worked there for 3 years, became fluent in Khmer, made a lot of very good friends. Came back after her term there and went to Vietnam for a year, doing a similar sort of thing, really, helping out.
So she's a giver, she's a contributor.
She's a giver, totally, absolutely devoted towards helping other people. Laura, you're going to have to edit some of this stuff out, but Laura's my mate, you know, we're sort of soulmates. I suppose partly because of the horses. Like with Laura, she took, if we were having a 3-day event, do you know what a 3-day event is, where you do the show jumping, the dressage and the cross country? Everybody would have a horse there, some would have 2. Laura would have 3. And go and do that cross country course or whatever on these horses. She's tough. She was a swimmer. At school she was a swimmer, and she swam in Perth and Adelaide and Tasmania and Sydney at the Olympic pool there a few times, and she won all sorts of medals in the pool. Got to be in the top 10 in the finals in the, she does butterfly and breaststroke.
So a very determined person?
Very determined. If we lock horns, very determined. I always surrender.
Do you?
But she's also had a really interesting career. She's into alternative medicines. She studied nursing and then predominantly lent towards midwifery. So she officially did nursing, but since then she's become a doula. And do you know what a doula is? And nor did I, and I thought it was an Indian word, but I think it's a Hungarian word. It's a midwife, but it's a little bit more than a midwife, somebody who will look after the mother in preparation for the imminent birth, attend the birth, maybe even deliver the baby, and then care for the mother beyond birth. So instead of taking the uniforms off and going home, Laura takes them through the whole experience. She went off to, she had a baby, got pregnant and had a baby. It was a one-night stand, nice guy we were later to meet. Got pregnant and went overseas wondering what the devil she was going to do about it, and ended up in Peru. And so the baby was born in Peru. La Maya, named after a little village in the Andes there, 10,000 feet above sea level. She's called La Maya because La Maya was the village, and it stands for the gathering place of the llamas in the Quechua language, I understand. And so because she's a girl, they added an A on the end, so it became La Maya, a beautiful child. And so Laura lived in Peru and learned a great deal of the Quechua, or a bit of the Quechua language, and Spanish, because nearly everybody speaks Spanish in South America, as you know. Mark's adventurous, I think, probably sum that up. Mark likes adventure. He likes to challenge things. If something stands in front of him, he's going to be part of it or beat it. I think that would pretty well sum it up. He was reasonably academic. He was very good at most sports, like cricket and rugby. Never took to horse riding. He had one bad experience there on a pony, but I don't think that specifically put him off. But he hopped on another one. Well, they got an expression they use for the Big Dipper, you know.
Roller coaster?
The roller coaster. Yeah, no, they got another word for it. Anyway, he got on this pony and it went into a bucking spree. To his credit, though, he rode it extremely well. He never came off, but this pony really put on a performance for him. I can't think of that word now.
The Big Dipper.
Yeah, something like that, but it specifically summed it up. It was a great description of what we'd just watched.
He seems a very determined young man.
I think, especially now, I think he knows where he's going. For a long time there, I think he wanted to be involved in real estate, but now he's more focused on development, and I think he's got himself firmly focused on doing some serious development. I hope that I might have had some influence there, because at one stage I came down from New Guinea and invested in Sydney in building home units, and I think we built a couple of hundred home units, mostly in towers of 8 floors, 32 units a building. Sometimes 30, we'd have penthouses on top. So, and I think I showed him some of those buildings in Sydney, and that may have made him think about doing that.
Give me an insight into Anne.
This Anne?
Yeah.
Current wife?
Yeah. Give me an insight into who she is.
Yeah, well, she's been a very important part of my life. And yeah, she's a very talented photographer, as you might have gathered over, or Jeff would have gathered over that recent conversation. And she takes extremely good photographs. She's meticulous in that sort of thing. But she's got a hand for decoration and decor. And if you look around the house and see the little things that she's done, it's just incredible how talented she is.
What do you love about it?
Her cooking. She's a cordon bleu cook. And she does all the cooking. I don't interfere. I think she'd like me to help her sometimes, or be involved sometimes. She'd probably like me to sit down one night and cook the dinner, but no, she's a very good cordon bleu cook.
What else do you love about her?
I suppose how good she's been as a mother. I suppose how she's put up with me, because I wouldn't be easy to live with. I would not be easy to live with, and she's put up with that. She's rolled with the punches. We've had some big ups and downs. Since we came back to Australia, more downs than ups. Many more downs than ups, financially.
Describe her to me when you first met her. She was obviously a beautiful girl.
She was very attractive, yeah. I think I barely noticed her when I first met her, because she was very young and freckle-faced and new to Papua New Guinea, and I was focused on other things, mainly the development of my business. But I went down and sat at a table in the coffee shop with her employer then, Ivor Manton. They were having a cup of coffee and I joined them for coffee. And then sat at the end of the table, and she didn't say much. We were introduced, and then I left to go back to work. And then only weeks later we would have met up a couple of times again. And then I was on my own soon after that. And so I suppose I became seriously attracted. And then she came to work in the factory next door to me, and so it was very convenient to slip over there for a cup of tea or a chat at morning tea time, that sort of thing. But she doesn't shy away from a challenge. We had 4 children under 5 years, all evenly spaced, or fairly evenly spaced. She took up flying, because I was mad keen on flying aeroplanes. My whole life was flying, really, and that's what I couldn't water ski in the Highlands, but I could fly, and it's so beautiful. I bore people to death talking about the beauty of the Highlands of New Guinea, because they're spectacularly beautiful. The mountains and the rivers and the valleys and the plantations, and it's a spectacularly beautiful place to live, and the climate. It's the same temperature every day. 365 days of the year. It gets daylight at 6 o'clock and gets dark soon after 6 in the evening, every day of the year. Grow anything. If you stand still too long, you grow yourself, I think. But Anne took up flying, and she got her licence. It was quite an interesting experience for me, watching on the sidelines, because I was pretty anxious. She'd go on these cross-country navigations, and one day on a Sunday afternoon, she went on a navigation exercise to Wewak, which we're doing about an hour and a half up, and turn around an hour and a half back across some very, very rugged terrain. Anyway, she's on the way back, And she calls up on the radio, says she's unsure of her position. And that's, you don't want to hear that. You don't want to hear that. And the only other plane in the sky was the Seventh-day Adventists, because they don't fly on Saturdays, they fly on Sundays. Well, fortunately, they were up there, and he was able to give us some directions to find a route which was less threatening weather, because the weather had deteriorated quite dramatically, and there were heavy clouds in the track that she had planned to take. And she may, of course, have entered that mountainous area a little bit to the right hand of the track, to the south of the track, because she became disoriented by this cloud and couldn't be sure where she was. And fortunately, this pilot called back and said, I'm en route between wherever and wherever, and if you alter your heading a few degrees to the north, then you'll probably find a clear path through the hills. And she did. And then another day, she was going to take off from Mount Hagen on an exercise from Mount Hagen to Madang, which is about a bit under, and the aircraft she was in, about an hour each way, I suppose. Maybe a bit less. And the weather looked really awful, frankly. It didn't look good at all. I didn't like that idea. But the reports from Madang were the weather was fantastic in Madang. Where we were in Mount Hagen, it was fantastic. But in between, of course, was Mount Wilhelm. That's 15,000 feet high. But you had to skirt round Wilhelm one side or the other through designated tracks. Anyway, she prepared for the flight and went off. And I thought, I'm going to hop in a plane and follow her. Anyway, I hopped in and followed her, and in no time at all I was battling the weather. You know, the weather was bad. And I had no sign of where she'd gone and which way she'd gone, so I flew down to Madang, landed, no sign, turned around, went back to Mount Hagen. I got back to Mount Hagen, she'd got back there, but she'd turned around because of the weather. Quite wisely, she'd turned around and gone back to Hagen and was safely on the ground.
Now, I get that you have had and still have a real love affair with Papua New Guinea, yeah?
Absolutely. Yeah.
You love the place.
I go back every opportunity Anne will let me get out of sight. Well, if she turns her back for a moment, I'm gone, and she knows at least where I am.
What do you love so much about it?
Just the affinity I have with the people, with revisiting the experiences I've had previously in those places. Bit of everything.
Why did you come back to Australia?
Well, we had 2 young children, and we subsequently had 2 more, but education was an issue. Independence had come and gone, and there was tension in the air about expatriate properties, and there was a general feeling of unrest, and we were right about that, because between 1985 and 1995 things got very uncomfortable up there, everywhere. And so our decision to leave was probably right. Some of my friends didn't leave, they're still there, and they've done very well indeed, and they're not going to leave either. They want to die there, you know.
Do you sometimes wish you'd stayed?
I often wish I had stayed, but that's probably not a sensible, would not have been a sensible thing to do. But being able to go back makes it easier. You know, I've been back there and climbed Mount Wilhelm. I've been back there and done the Kokoda track a couple of times. I've been out fishing. I've taken a friend from here up here 3 years ago. He'd never been to Papua New Guinea. And on the second day out at sea, he came out of the water and he said, "Peter, this has been the best day of my whole life." I said, "Richard, I won't mention that to Judy." That's his wife. He said it's been the best day of his whole life. But we went everywhere and visited all our friends up there, my friends up there, and had a great time.
Why Toowoomba?
Schooling. I think that's a pretty simple answer, because we had 4 children at that stage, and Toowoomba has a good reputation for schools, and has good schools. And the climate's good. And we were forced off the land down, and we bought a farm. We first came down here, we bought the farm at Colondina. We were there for 6 years to the day. I bought it on the 24th of April and moved off on the 24th of April. We were paying interest rates on our borrowings there onshore at 18.5%. We were financing equipment there at 22%. This is in the period in the 80s, middle of the 80s, and it was obvious that we were never going to get out of that. So I sold the property. I made a record in the Riverina when I bought it, and we set another record when we sold it for per acre of land. At that auction, when I bought that place, Colindina, I called up the neighbour when I saw it advertised. I think I'd been down to visit. We were on the way to the Melbourne Cup, and I went to visit this guy on the property next door who'd lived in Papua New Guinea. He'd been a neighbour there, and he showed us this property. And then 2 months later, I said advertised in the Weekend Australian. So I rang him up and I said, "What do you think?" He said, "Peter, best paddock in Australia, best paddock in Australia." And he's probably right, but he hadn't taken into account the 18% and 22% interest rates. So we were going well. But we did a valuation of the property. I worked out what I thought it was worth, and consulted my father-in-law, Anne's father, who was very experienced. He was also a valuer, and we came up with a price, and I went down to the auction. And the first bid was considerably higher than our valuation, so we were already out of the field. I think we valued it about 750,000, and the first bid was 800,000. And it got to 1.3 million. I thought, geez, I've come a long way for this, and I put my finger up. Well, this fellow dropped the hammer as I was red hot. Sold! He sold! He was so excited. And so I'd set a record, and I had to justify that. So I said, well, look, we needed a home in Australia. We've got a tenuous situation where we are. We need a home in Australia. We're going to have to pay $500,000 for a good home. So if you take that off the value of this farm, maybe the land wasn't so expensive. That was my reasoning. Anyway, 6 years later, we gave up and sold it off. We were compelled to, really, by the bank.
What caused the toughest phase for you and Anne? Was it the financial stress?
Yeah, I think ever since then we've been under financial stress. Ever since we had to leave Colindina, she had converted that garden there into a beautiful garden, and we had converted that farm into a very modern, highly efficient producer. We had 200 cows, 2,200 sheep. We grew wheat, oats, barley, lucerne, sunflowers. We won the crop competition one year. We did everything right. I would like to think we did everything right. And still we went backwards.
Because of the interest rates?
Interest rates and commodity prices. Wheat was $110 a tonne. 5 years later, or a few years after we left, it had gone from 110 to 280. Lamb prices had gone from $28, if you won the top price on the day, $28, to $280. 10 times. And cattle prices, you know, from $200 to $1,000 a head, that sort of thing. We missed out. We went into the worst possible time, and
luck, right?
We had to get out before it was too late.
Just luck.
It was luck. Well, it's farming. People who've been in the industry all their life have been in those ups and downs. We had fires, we had bushfires, and we had floods. And we had drought. So we suffered everything at Colindina, and still we produced magnificent crops.
Did you ever think that you were going to collapse under the weight of all of this?
I suppose all my life I've had my eye on the back door, how to get out, like you do when you're flying. When you're flying in bad weather, you keep that back door open, just in case. You've got to be able to get out of this. So you venture forth with your eye on the back door. Well, we went farming there. And I remember saying to one manager, I appointed him as a manager, and he asked me what my philosophy was there, and I said, well, look, this is a dynasty thing. We're here forever, and so everything we do here will be designed towards my family being able to go on here for a century. And then a short while later in the same conversation, I said to him, but we're going to do this just in case we have to go to the market. He said, but a moment ago you said, you're here I said, you keep the back door open, just in case.
The you've noted here the journey to PNG to Singapore as one of the highlights. So,
well, only in the sense that from PNG to Singapore by ship.
Via Manila and Hong Kong with Anne and Bob and Barbara. And
I guess because my affinity with ships. I came out from England on a ship. I came to Australia by ship. I went back to England 9 years later on a ship. And I loved the ships, and this is the QE2. This is not a boat or a fishing smack. This is the QE2. So we arranged with the QE2 to hop on in Port Moresby, and Bob and Barbara Hogarth, my partners in Sydney, in the unit building, were getting on in Sydney. So they boarded in Sydney, and then we get a telegram saying that the boat is not now coming to Port Moresby due to a mechanical problem, and they're going to bypass Port Moresby. And I said, oh no, they're not. They're picking me up here. So I radioed the ship and I said, prepare for a helicopter landing at 3:30 in the afternoon. I got a telegram back from the captain saying, no facilities for the helicopter to land on the ship. Oh, really? Well, I understand it has a helipad on it. So, not to accept that, I went down to the, by then we'd flown from Mount Hagen into Port Moresby, ready to get on this down ship, by hook or by crook. My friend in Port Moresby runs the local airline there, Tal Air, Adrian Nisbet. And Adrian says, why don't you fly to Horn Island, and when they send the pilot boat out to get the pilot, you go out in the pilot boat, and when he jumps off, you jump on. Good idea, Adrian, but how will I get to Horn Island? He said, I'll fly you down there. So we get in the 402 and fly to Horn Island, go across to Thursday Island and climb into bed for a bit of a sleep. The pilot is leaving at 1 o'clock in the morning to go out and meet the QE2 at sea. And off the north coast of the Cape there, north and to the west of Cape York, there's a little rock sticks out of the sea. It's a big rock, I suppose you'd say. It's small in circumference, but it stands high out of the sea, called Booby Island Lighthouse. And he said, righto, the pilot is meeting the QE2 at Booby Island Lighthouse. That'll do. That's about an hour and a bit on this pilot boat. So they wake us up in the morning at the hotel, we board the pilot boat, go out to sea in very, very rough conditions, and Anne's not a good traveller at sea. And we arrive at the QE2. It's so rough out there that they had to turn the QE2 to flatten out the sea. They couldn't flatten out the swell, but they could smooth the surface of the sea. So we pull alongside what they call the gun port, the big doors they open up on the side of the ship where they take stuff in and out. Open up the gun port and we pull up alongside the ship, and 1 minute it's about 2 metres above us, the next minute it's about 10 metres above us or more, and it's dropped down a rope ladder. I said to the crew on the pilot boat, would you make sure my wife and suitcases get up the ladder okay? I'll see you on board. And up I went. And the pilot got off and off they went. So we boarded the QE2. We went to give up. And I said to the guy on board there, if you've got a telephone, I just want to ring my friends down under the deck. And I called up and said, Bob, is that you? And by then it's 2:30 in the morning. He said, oh yeah, it is. I've just gone to bed. And I said, well, what'll we do for breakfast then? And he said, oh, look, I don't know what we're going to do. It looks like we're not going to see you. I said, no, I'm on board. He couldn't believe it. They'd come out of the middle of the night from nowhere and appeared on board. Anyway, then we sailed up to Manila and Hong Kong and Singapore. I just liked that trip. It was the QE2 after all. It didn't come in those days, it didn't come any bigger or better than the QE2.
No. And an adventure to get there.
And an adventure getting on it.
I'm going to mention some names now. It may well be we've already touched on these people, but you've mentioned them as major influences. So if we've talked about them, that's fine. If not, summarise for me why they're so important to you. Alan and Joan Summers.
Well, they were the couple who, their daughter, Jennifer Ann, had left England in 1949-50 to go farming in New Zealand. They decided there was no future in England. England had been devastated by the war by then, and the war hadn't been over very long. Alan had a very bitter experience with the war. He'd been wounded and treated badly, and so he wanted out. And he was going to New Zealand, and that he did, but he came and stayed with us in Norfolk before he departed. So when I had to make that choice between Canada, Australia or New Zealand, that was the easy out because Alan and Joan were there. They were much older than me, but at least there was someone there that I would know. And they had arranged with their neighbour that I'd get a job there if I could get there. And so the old man paid the £10 and off I went.
Off you went. You also...
And they looked after me very well. I must add that Joan sent me a calendar then, so that was in 1952, and every Christmas from 1952 for at least 40 years she sent me a New Zealand calendar of all these beautiful pictures.
Okay. I think we've already spoken of John and Anna Middleton, have we not?
Yeah, they owned 5 plantations on Carker Island. He was the second generation. Now his boys, the third generation, run those plantations. And John and Anna are very close friends. They looked after her extraordinarily well. And Anna came from Czechoslovakia. She was an air hostess, and John met her on a flight somewhere. And she taught us to water ski. Well, it was like coming out of the bar into heaven, if you like, because up till then all we'd done is try to kill ourselves on motorbikes or drink alcohol, interspersed periodically with tennis. But then she introduced water skiing, and we all took to water skiing like fish to water.
And you've spoken about that at length, which is good. Bill Stokes and Anne?
Yeah, Bill was at Bands when I arrived in Bands in 1963. It was the 1st of January 1963, and it wasn't shortly after that I met Anne at the club, and later on I met Bill, and he and I went briefly into partnership there for a while with some trucks, and then Bill died prematurely of cancer. It was very unfortunate.
And why was he such an influence on your life?
Because they were such close friends. You know, to this day I'd say Bill died when he was 42 or 3. Anne turned 80 the other day, and without a doubt she's been my closest friend for more than 50 years. She's my confidant, and she has been to my family too. You know, they were just lovely people, and they were intellectual and read a lot too, which meant we had a lot of fun playing charades and talking about books, and generally warm to each other.
Bob Oatley?
Bob Oatley was a major influence because he was big time. Bob was the big time. He did the coffee export business from Papua New Guinea, so I met him initially as he came to Papua New Guinea to buy coffee and to public relations exercise. So I'd meet him there, and quite often I flew him in my plane, pick him up in Goroka and fly him to Mount Hagen, or fly him from Hagen back to Goroka or whatever on his visits. And he indirectly was responsible for lending me the money to buy the plantations. That's a lot of money. Believe me, even by today's standards, that was a lot of money, no security, and 100% of the cost price. So I owe him plenty.
What about Jim Warner and Sylvia? Their influence on you, why they were such an influence?
Well, he was my lawyer, and they're a lovely couple too. You know, some people you have an absolute affinity with, and Jim and Sylvia were those two. He was my lawyer for a while. He was appointed by the firm of the time, Gaydens, and looked after my affairs in Papua New Guinea. He was the one that set up the company under which we trade, Petard Pty Limited, was made up by Jim Warner. I let him do that. And as you probably know, it's the French word for fart. It's also a little cannon for blowing in castle doors. You know, in old English days, they'd carry their petard, or you could be hoist by your own petard. So they carry their little gun, you know, and set it up with a great ball of metal and blast in the castle door. That's a petard. And so Jim, a very close friend to myself and Anne, and Anne too, I'm sure, has an affinity with Jim and Sylvia. They're just warm people.
Doug Anderson and Jane?
It's very similar. Doug, I advertised for an accountant with a firm who found positions for people in Sydney. I called him from New Guinea and I said, I need an accountant. And they said, well, this guy, he's single. He'd be interested in going to Papua New Guinea, and we put Doug on, and this was all in 1970, and Doug is our accountant today, all those years later. He had a brief term away. He came to work for us in Papua New Guinea. He got very sick and left Papua New Guinea. And then much later, to my surprise, he reappeared in Papua New Guinea. So we developed a very close friendship, and then he took over running my business again and is still there. running the business. I don't make a decision, that would be incorrect. I try not to make a decision without consulting with Doug, and every now and again I make a decision, and Doug's quite firm with me. He tells me he thinks I've made a wrong decision. I'm sure he's right, but we've had a good, close relationship. We've been in business together too. One stage, all of those have been pretty disastrous, though, from my point of view. We we bought a couple of seaplanes up in Cairns and ran a little operation servicing the Barrier Reef with seaplanes. And we got totally shafted there by the management. We appointed a manager, and it turned out he was a total disaster. And then I went down to Sydney. I saw advertised the Woolwich Marina, which is on Hunters Hill, on the end of that peninsula there. Great spot, overlooking the island, naval island there, Cockatoo Dock. Yeah, it's a magnificent position. And it was a good buy, I thought at the time. Bought it at auction. And everybody was so pleased, Doug and Jim Warner. So they took a small share each. So I had the majority, and they each took a share. And then I bought Colin Diner, and once I was in trouble, I needed to get out of that, and I did a deal with them, and they took over the responsibility of Woolwich Marina. But it was a great spot and great venture.
Colin Hayes?
Yeah, Colin Hayes, racehorses. Did you ever meet Colin Hayes?
I think I did at some stage.
In the early days, when I first met him, they said, you know, he's the best trainer of owners in the country, indicating that he had everybody on side, but in fact wasn't any good. Well, that was not right. I mean, he was absolutely a fantastic horse trainer. And at one stage I had, I think, 17 animals there down at his place, so we were in there in the deep end, paddling. And we got heavily involved in the racing industry. And Colin said to me one day, you know, racing has been the scene of my greatest thrills and my greatest disappointments, and that was just after Dulcify had been shot on put down on the track at Flemington. It was a tragic day, and there was 80,000 people down. I think 40,000 would have been in tears. But Colin was one of those, another person who's very warm. And so I loved my involvement there. But the horses don't owe me any money. We had many successes. We ran a third in the Golden Slipper, which is a big race. We won the Labor Day Cup in South Australia twice. We won the Gold Cup in Perth, at Ascot in Perth. We won lots of races, and they were great thrills. On the other hand, of course, if you know anything about horses, I've heard every excuse in the book as to why they failed. And some of our better horses had unfortunate accidents. One got galloped on from behind, was an extremely good horse, and had to be destroyed. Another one we called Bird of Paradise, for obvious reasons. And it was a magnificent looking animal, all potential in the world, and it died on the track at Corowa while training. So, but in the end we sold well and got out.
What about Bob McPherson and Mary?
That's my father-in-law and mother-in-law, and they were very, very kind to us when we came down to Australia. We exploited them right to the limit. They were babysitters. If we'd go overseas without the children, we'd leave them with Bob and Mary. Or if we went with the children, they'd look after the farm. When I was going to buy the farm, Bob was a real estate valuer. He'd been a farmer all his life, but he did then real estate valuations when he retired from farming and graduated there with honours too. He was very much into it. So he did the valuation for me. This is the valuation that came half what we ultimately paid for it, but at least his is a well-calculated valuation. You know, he told us what the potential was, and he was pretty right.
So they became not just your parents-in-law, but close friends.
We were mates. Yeah, Bob and I were mates, and Mary was just, she was the matriarch. She orchestrated many things.
What's your position re faith, Peter? Are you a believer in a God?
The jury's still out there. Actually, I am very respectful. Like, I object to the grandchildren saying, using that word blasphemously. I like to think that the children would have some respect, if not for this God who may or may not be there, but for the God that other people need and see. You know, I think they should. You have to accept that that none of us know. We can have our own ideas and opinions. I personally don't have a firm opinion yet. I'm still considering that one. I said to the Catholic priest in Bands about 55 years ago, I said, I'll worry about all that stuff when the time comes. He said, Peter, but you don't know when the time's going to come. Of course, he's right there too. But I'm often outspoken about Islam, for instance, and the Quran. Now, and people get hysterical about this. We're talking about a strong religion, and we're talking about a book which is very similar to our own Bible, with very similar rules in it, and open to interpretation. And to condemn Islam out of hand, or to condemn the Quran out of hand, it's just not right. And apart from that, many people who believe in Islam need something to lean on. And religion, and the same with the Catholic religion, it's something to lean on. When the leader of that church says something, people take a bit of notice. And there are a lot of people who are dependent upon religion.
And they serve a really useful purpose.
Yes. My children, none of them have been terribly religious, although we sent them to Anglican primary school and Presbyterian high school in the girls' case, and Anglican primary school for Mark, and then Toowoomba Grammar, which is non-denominational Protestant.
To conclude our discussion, I'd like you to leave a message for your future generations about how you'd like to see them go about their lives and what you know works.
No, I wouldn't. I would like to say to them that the reason I'm here talking to you today is that I have a vacuum. My family history is a vacuum. I didn't have any grandparents. I met a grandmother on one occasion. She came to visit us in 1946 or 7, and then died a short while afterwards. So she was the only communication I ever had with grandparents. And consequently, I have no uncles, no aunts, and no grandparents. And so what I am doing at the moment, and the reason I'm recording my little section of history, is so at some stage they will be able to go back at least that far and find some sort of history that's not a vacuum. And they can go back to my parents and their brothers and sisters and so on. So this generation, if you like, back to that generation, but we can't go beyond unless I can build a bit of history prior to that. And that's very difficult. I found an interesting thing. I found yesterday in a bit of stuff that I have my father's name. It was on a certificate that he had indicating, when he got married, it said he was the son of this fella who was actually deceased. So he was married at 35 in his first marriage, and Thomas Alexander Howard was his father. Well, now I will try and pursue Thomas Alexander Howard, and the only way I'm going to be successful there is so I know that roughly the area they came from, and the census, because the British are pretty thorough with census, and so I might be able to track him there. When I was looking at my father's war history, a lot of those war records were actually lost. Many were destroyed by the war. Births, deaths and marriages were all recorded at Somerset House, but military records recorded other institutions, and many of those were obliterated by the war. All my life, I have to tell you that all my life I've wondered about what came before us. What did my father's father do, and what did my mother's father do. I know that they were involved in the law. Her family were in the Inner Temple in London. You know, that's where the law courts are and all that sort of thing. All the senior barristers have their offices there. And on the eve before I left on the Rangatani from Tilbury, my father took me to an office in the Inner Temple there to meet with a guy who fiddled around his desk and pulled out a pocket knife and gave me a pocket knife to take with me to New Zealand. But that was, and even now I don't know who he was. I don't know whether he was related to my mother or my father, what.
But now your future generations have got this to refer to.
To lean back, to go back to. At least they don't have to go back. At least they can get back to this far, whereas I can't go anywhere beyond my parents.
Great. Okay. We got it.
Yeah.
We got it.
Anything else, you have to wait for the book.
That's it.
I don't know what you could say about some of these other places. I'd like to have shown you so you could make that decision. Places like the homestead we lived in out at Kingsthorpe, Olgari Homestead, built in 1874.
So tell us about the property.
Just at Olgari Homestead, I suppose a lot of interesting things about that place. It was a great place to bring up 4 children. We all drove to school from there every day. Sometimes I would go to the schools 3 times before breakfast. Like Laura was a swimmer, so she had to be at school before 5:30 in the morning, which the others would do, they might do music or drama. They had to be in there by 6:30, and Mark was the baby of the family then. I couldn't have him in there at 4:30 or 5:30 or 6:30. He had to be in there by 8 o'clock. So I'd arrive home by 9 o'clock, having delivered the 3 children to their respective schools or classes or whatever pursuits they had, and get back home for breakfast with the mail. But the house, that was a very important landholding historically. There'd been a very, very large landholding, 80,000 acres, and the entrance was in the main street in Toowoomba, at the gates of the property. And the homestead had been basically on the same site as the current homestead, the original bush material one. It was built of concrete, and that concrete had been brought out from England. There were no cement factories in Australia in 1874, so they brought the concrete out from England. The walls were that thick, 300 millimetres, 350 millimetres thick, and solid concrete, no reinforcing, unheard of. You know, building concrete walls where the ceilings were 16 foot high and the walls that thick on the black soil plains, you know. Foundations were 14 feet below the floorboards. Some places you could actually walk underneath the house, but from the floorboards down to the bottom of the foundation is 14 feet and allegedly secured by an anchor chain which went round to basically hold it all together to stop it spreading out in the black soil, which constantly moves with moisture. And but as far as bringing up children were concerned, which was what it was all about, we had 4 children, and we were all directed towards getting them through schools and in reasonable sort of style. We virtually had a pet farm, you know, with chooks and turkeys and geese and ducks and guinea fowl and a goat and cattle and ponies and you name it. It was like a menagerie, dogs and cats and yeah, just a beautiful home. It had been that had been a point from which Leichhardt left, never to return. When he went west, he pulled in at Olgari and departed from there on his exploratory trip across the centre.
Didn't make it.
And didn't come back. He might be still going.